Hello everyone. We're going to take a look at another concept here this week. This is probably the concept that's the most helpful or has the most implications that we're going to take a look at this week, and that's building some looping structures in your code. We expect our programs to the reason we have programs is to do kind of tedious work for us. And so sometimes our programs need to work through a lot of information and finally come up with some output, right? And so sometimes it's helpful if we can have sections of our code kind of repeating themselves until they find a particular outcome that we'd like. And we'll be learning how to use this for searching through strings later on, and a lot of other things, but we'll just take it kind of step by step here and do a pretty basic thing here at the beginning. So what I've got here for you right now is just a simple little program that is supposed to generate 3 unique random numbers. Alright, so in other words, they click generate numbers, and I guess one thing I have in here that we haven't talked about yet, but we'll get to, that's pretty easy, is we can have just like message boxes can pop up just showing someone some information, we can have input boxes pop up too where the user puts information in, and like I said, we'll talk about that more later. There happens to be an input box in my little demo here, but essentially the idea here is we've got 3 places for 3 numbers on this form. We would like them to be 3 different random numbers, okay? And we're going to ask the user to tell us what's the range for these random numbers, okay? So obviously it has to be greater than or equal to 3. If they pick 3 as the top of the range, then we can have 3 unique random numbers, right? If they pick 2, the problem here would be, that the loop would run forever, right? Because we wouldn't be able to create 3 unique random numbers if our range was only 1 and 2. Right? Seems pretty obvious, but it's just one of those things. So the input box pops up, the user puts in a number greater than or equal to 3, and then we've got our random number equations here in a loop. So the user's telling us the largest number of the range, right? And so we've got this here where we're generating these 3 random numbers between 1 and whatever the high number is that the user tells us, and we've got this do loop here. It's going to continue to loop through here. So we see do, it's going to do these 3 things or give us 3 random numbers and then count how many times this loop runs. We got a counter in here just counting how many times the loop runs, and it's going to loop while any of these numbers are equal to each other. So if 1 is equal to 2, 2 is equal to 3, or 1 is equal to 3, it's going to loop while that condition is true. So if that's true, it just keeps doing this loop. And we put a counter in here and display the counter just to help us see how many times this loop runs. So if I run this, when the user clicks generate numbers, here comes my input box here, and like I'm going to say, let's say I say 100 and say OK. Alright, well, it only took 1 loop to come up with 3 different random numbers from 1 to 100. That kind of makes sense. It's not going to be very hard to do, right? Let's make this lower. Let's jump all the way down to just 3 here, okay? And it only took 15 times to get 3 different numbers if it was 3, but a lot less, the other time, or I took more because it was running through them. It was more difficult to try to come up with 3 numbers that were unique when there was only 3 possibilities, right? Whereas with 100, it was pretty easy. It only had to run through it 1 time, right? So that's what's going on there. If I try to put this at less than 3, see where there's that do. I got a loop in here as well. It's going to loop while the largest number is less than 3. So if the user gives us something less than 3, which would create this to be an infinite loop down here, it's not going to let that happen. It's just going to say, hey, try again, put in something 3 or greater. And we could have better feedback in there, but that's basically the point of that. As a matter of fact, let's just look at this one. So just cancel. Okay, well, yeah, never mind. Let me put in a number there. I didn't put code in there to take into account cancel because we were just doing a quick little demo. Let's just change something in here. We could change this so this loops while this condition is true. Let's say we wanted to make this a do while loop, right? We could say do while any of these are equal to each other. And that would work as well, right? Because when this comes in here at first, these are all going to be zeros up here. So it is going. So in this situation, this loop might not even run one time if this was true, or if this was false right away. Excuse me. It wouldn't run the loop because we got this do while. It looks for a condition first up here, but since they're going to be equal to each other when we come in, they're all going to be 0. It will run this loop as long as they are the same here, right? So we've just kind of changed that, okay? Hey everyone, it kind of struck me that one thing I wanted to do in the previous video was talk a little bit about infinite loops. Well, loops can be helpful. They also can be a big problem if you set them up incorrectly, and there's kind of two main ways that you can see that happening. All right, so I wanted to show you that. So I've commented out a couple of things here. You know, this was a program where input box shows up, they say the highest number that they want it to be, and then this loop runs until it creates 3 different random numbers. Well, I've commented out those random numbers. All I did here was I've just got int num1 adding to itself by 1,000 each time, and this loop runs while int number is greater than 1. So as you can see now, you probably won't, do something this obviously silly, but if you were to make a loop like this, it's important to understand what this is going to look like when this happens, because I do have basically kind of an infinite loop here, except there is one thing that's going to stop it. So if this part doesn't really matter, I'm just going to pick 3. So now when it's trying to generate the numbers here, notice it ran real quick for a second, and now int number has become this very large number, actually too large of a number to be held in an integer variable. So the program has stopped, and it said there's this overflow exception because this number is so large it does not fit into this integer variable. As you can see, the counter ran that many times before that happened, or the loop ran that many times. My counter is doing that. So that's one way that an infinite loop can happen. Actually, that's maybe the better way it can happen, because you're going to definitely notice that what the problem is right there. Okay, so I'm just going to stop this. But another way that it can happen would be if we have a situation here that's not so obvious, where we're not going to overflow a variable. So let me change a few things here. I'm just going to uncomment this, and actually we're going to change we're not going to have this be random. We're just going to assign these numbers, all of them, 3. So here again we have a problem, because this loop is going to keep running. Oh yeah, we need to change something here as well, because we want the loop to keep running. If any of these are equal to each other. And since I've actually made them equal to each other, that's going to happen. So now when I click this, now here you go. This loop is just running. It's never getting to the next step in the code where it shows stuff in the label, and it's kind of hard. Now we did have an overflow, but this time in the counter, right? The counter hit the overflow, fortunately. If I didn't have a counter in there, we never would have gotten an overflow. It would have just kept running. And what we would have had to do is we would have had to go to our task manager, or click. As a matter of fact, maybe let's see that once. Let's take the counter out here. Yeah, I got to stop it from running. Let's comment that counter out here too. Now, when we do this, took the counter a little bit longer to overflow the variable than it did when I was adding by thousands, right? But here again, now I can't move this, it's giving me that message that it's not responding, right? So here's where I need my task manager. Hit Control Alt Delete, start the task manager. Then I could go in here where random numbers is not responding, end the task, and I can close that program. But that's not something that we want to do in general, because we've got that infinite loop running. So while loops can be helpful, we need to be careful when we're setting them up, because we can create big problems there. Okay, so you got a loop that's running and never ending. You might have to run your task manager by hitting Control Alt Delete and then telling that application to stop running. If you do have a situation where a variable overflows, what's probably happening there is that you also had an infinite loop running there. So just a couple things to watch for.